Hey, Rebel News will be carrying all of the segments you see today at rumble.com/Rebel News. But as I mentioned, we have so many other Rumble content creators who are doing their live shows here too, so you're really in for a treat. This next fella is a Canadian with a big heart. And I saw the pain in his heart. You could feel it through the screen as he saw his beloved country, especially his city of Montreal, which was one of the most locked down places in the world. They literally had a curfew, whether you were sick or not, whether you were jabbed or not, a curfew, like you were in prison. Lockdown, a word heretofore only used for prison riots. And I saw him reach into his heart, but also his mind, because he's a clever and sophisticated lawyer, and to give a kind of legal analysis that we certainly didn't hear from the mainstream media. May I introduce to you a man I not only call a friend, but an ally in the same mission for freedom. He's based in the US now, where he has an even larger audience, teaming up with Robert Barnes, an outstanding constitutional lawyer. Without further ado, will you join me in welcoming, for his portion of today's Rumble broadcast, a dear friend, David Frei, aka Viva Frei.
Two phones. The mic is working. I got two phones. One works, and the other one is for my notes. Both have the Serenity Prayer on the back of them, which I'm not a religious man or a recovering alcoholic yet, but it is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And the reason why I've got it twice is because I cannot remember the Serenity Prayer in as much as I'm supposed to be living by it. It's still morning. Good morning, everybody. I was going to do this standing up, but I'll just sit down and it's more comfortable. So for those of you who don't know me, I didn't always look like this. I used to be normal, but I started with that joke, and I'm trying to find a picture back when I was 18, 19, playing squash at McGill, and I looked like this. And so there's a cycle of life. You know, the hair grows to represent how you feel at the time, and then you cut it to fit into society, and then you realize you don't necessarily want to fit into society. But for those who don't know who I am actually a former litigator. So I practiced sworn in 2007, and I practiced for a good 13 years. And I did a little bit, I did commercial litigation, civil litigation, no family, no criminal, no tax. That was basically what I avoided. Worked at a very big law firm, and then left after my first kid because I realized that wasn't the life I wanted. Started on my own, and then did it on my own for another 7 years, and realized that was the life I didn't want. But the anecdote is, and it's going to merge into this is not going to be a black pill speech. It's going to sound like it at first, but there's a white pill happy ending. I did a bit of bankruptcy, and everybody knows the expression, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Hell hath no fury like a lawyer unpaid. Because I won't get into the details of the file. It was my foray into bankruptcy. A lawyer who knew all of the tricks of the trade in bankruptcy, who didn't get paid by my client, took him through the ringer. And don't need to get into that. It was a traumatizing experience in terms of what lawyers can do. But the expression in bankruptcy is things happen slowly, then all at once. And it is not just an analogy for bankruptcy. It's sort of an analogy also for what I call moral bankruptcy. It's an analogy for how things fall apart. You get used to certain faults, you get used to certain problems, and then one day something cataclysmic happens and you say, who could have seen this coming? It happens in bankruptcy, business. It happens in marriages where, you know, the cataclysmic event is something which is actually just a symptom of a series of problems that had built up over time. Relaying this into what we are living through right now. I never wanted to be political. Period. When I had my silly YouTube channel back in 2014, when it had squirrels and GoPros and tobogganing, I never wanted to touch politics. It wasn't because I wasn't interested in it. I realize now I knew absolutely nothing at the time as to how bad things could actually be. But I never wanted to touch politics, but I had the leanings. Then I got forced into it because, like I'm going to say some Greek philosopher said, might have been Plato, Socrates, if you don't take an interest in politics, politics will still take an interest in you. And things happen slowly, then all at once. 2020 and this flipping pandemic, and I almost want to call it a plandemic, and not because I don't believe there were issues, that there were health issues, but because I believe whatever health issues there were might have been either exaggerated, human-caused, and or definitively weaponized for political profit. And and so people seem to forget, like, 2018 was one of the worst flu seasons ever, where I think in the States between 60 and 80,000 people died. Toronto was shutting down hospitals because overwhelming the healthcare facilities. Had to cancel elective surgeries. That was happening pre-repackaging potentially of COVID. And I'm not going to spend the whole time here like what my conspiratorial thoughts are on COVID. I don't even think I'm that cynical yet to understand what actually went down. But the bottom line, COVID hits, the world as we knew it is upended, and then people are like, holy hell, how do they have the powers to do this? And at the time, I remember I never even knew of this thing called the Quarantine Act. Might be because I'm an idiot, and I never, I should have known because we had a pandemic back in 1906, and they had this old law on the books called the Quarantine Act, which was revamped relatively recently, in advance of this. Nobody noticed because nobody used it. And revamped, if anybody read the powers that the Quarantine Act granted to the government, it would blow your freaking mind, and it blew mine when I was like, oh, in 2020, we've got this Quarantine Act. It allows the government to lock you down. It allows the government to do things which you never would have thought could have ever been done, period, but it's on the books. Then you have people at the time emailing me, texting me, they say, Viva, did you see what the Quebec government slipped in under the radar? There's an amendment, or there's this law that allows for mass vaccination, and they send you this provision of law. And I read this law, and I'm like, holy crap, they slipped it in under the radar. Punchline, they didn't. It's a 23-year-old law. And I'm reading this provision where people are saying this is new, look what the government's doing under our very noses. And it says, can force mass vaccination or vaccination of an entire society or whatever, a group, for monkeypox. And I'm reading, I was like, well, if this was passed during COVID, why would they be referencing monkeypox? Was it predictive of what they think is coming with monkeypox? No. That law had been on the books, at least that provision, since 2001. And so this cataclysmic destruction of a free society, which we've seen metastasize at an exponential rate as of COVID, it's been in the works for decades. And if you're new to the channel, you'll love it. If you're old to the channel, I say this over and over again. It's Kierkegaard, life can only be understood backwards but must be lived forwards. You now look back and you see the groundwork that the government was laying by way of empowering itself with total control for decades. And we never realize it because it never impacts us until it does, and by that time, it's too late. So you start with COVID, and then everyone's like, holy cows, this is too much. But then you go back and you realize this has been in the works for years. And you go back to censorship and what we're seeing right now in terms of what we're here for, which is protesting this Online Harms Act, the so-called Online Harms Act, which is about online harms about as much as the border bill that they tried to pass in the States was about the border. It's like, all right, here's a few $1 billion for the border, and here's $60 billion to fund our foreign proxy wars, but we'll call it the border bill so we can slip in the total control, so that people don't even notice it. The censorship, Online Harms Act, what they're trying to push through now, and I was talking with Ezra earlier, and I respect his legal mind more than mine. I was sort of a little optimistic. Again, if you go to my Twitter feed, the banner should still be Lily Tomlin. No matter how cynical you are, it's hard to keep up. I'm saying, okay, well, this bill's not going to get passed. They might try what they did with Bill C-10 to C-11, the Online Streaming Act. Try to jam it through, shift the Overton window, let it die, and then take up the debate again, but with the new perspective that, oh, well, we went this far the last time, so we can start a little bit further with our negotiations this time. Ezra is a little more pessimistic and thinks that this actually stands a reasonable chance of passing. This Online Harms Bill, which seeks to do nothing more than criminalize speech, but not speech that deserves to be criminalized, because I've said it before, and I said it when I had two other panelists at the CSFN, the Canada Strong and Free. It's not to criminalize speech that's not already criminal. We already have the criminal laws that we need for harassment, threats, intimidation, doxing, revenge porn, to take some of the examples. It's criminalizing speech that's not already criminalized. It's criminalizing opaque speech that has no definition of any meaning or of any enforcement value. I mean, I appreciate the Supreme Court defined hatred as, I'll pull up the definition, but I won't because everyone's heard it already. It's ridiculous. Detestation, vilification, but not mere mockery or humiliation. Good. I appreciate the Supreme Court, which sometimes, as we've seen, is arguably an activist court, can come up with definitions which are themselves more problematic than problem solving. That's where legislation comes in to resolve the issue, not ratify the issue. And so this bill, online harms bill, which is going to define hatred, impose penalties that are cruel and unusual. I don't care if it's the potential, the mere potential for life imprisonment for promoting or advocating genocide, and I dare ask, what the hell does that even mean? Misgendering, some people take to be genociding. From the river to the sea, some people take to mean genocide. So it's not even clear that the people thinking about this or imposing it, supporting it, are even really reflecting on it. But it's weaponizing of language, it's weaponizing of thought for the purposes of being politically exploited. So where does it go back? It goes back years. It goes back to Bill C-63, which was adding gender expression and gender identity to the criminal code for hate crimes. And back in the day, again, I was never cynical enough, and I'm not sure that I'm cynical yet, but I'm getting there, and I'm working on it. Jordan Peterson was raising the alarm back in 2016. This will result in compelled speech. It will result in criminalizing discourse. And I said at the time, trying to not be a fence sitter, but trying not to be the boy who cried wolf, bad cases make bad law, bad legislation makes bad cases, and then bad judges make, make a bad society. But Jordan was right then, and we're only seeing it on steroids now. The question is, where does it go and where does it stop? Because it doesn't stop with Bill C-16, it doesn't start with C-16, because we were already in the middle of it. It's legislation after legislation after legislation to control a populace, to control the thought of the populace, and to control the behavior of the populace. What do we have now? You have Bill C-16, which was adding gender identity. Okay, fine. Then you have the Online Streaming Act, which is now going to govern, to some extent, limit, restrict, regulate the internet, as if we didn't already have enough laws for that. I have to keep track of all these laws because it's impossible to keep track of. The link tax, the online harms tax. Couple all this, like I have only become more of a vehement supporter of the Second Amendment after having moved to the States, but after having seen what happens. I mean, after seeing the gun grabs, which was also done under the cloak of COVID. Oddly enough, it's an amazing thing, more laws, less justice, but it also seems more laws, more problems. The stricter the gun laws get in Canada, the more gun violence seems to get out of control in Canada. It's been worse year after year since, I want to say 2013, but at the very least 2015. So, grabbing the guns in the dead of the night, pushing through these bills in the dead of the night, regulating the internet, and it doesn't end. And the amazing thing is, Chris made the announcement, Chris Pavlovsky, CEO of Rumble, fighting, I mean, that's why we're all here, fighting the fight, mentioned the other day how it seems that Rumble has been taken down, blacklisted in Russia because they were asked to remove, suppress, silence a few accounts. They weren't even political accounts. Some of them might have been, one of them was a marijuana account from what I understand, which it's a political issue, but it's not what we typically understand by political. Not criticizing Putin, but promoting policy that maybe is Putin doesn't like. And A, nobody seems to care, and B, it's the ultimate irony, and it's because I don't mean to dissect the left and the right, but my goodness, sometimes they make it hard for me not to. I say the left, the Democrats, the progressives, they lack consistency of thought, and they also lack insight. And I'm becoming convinced there's a reason for that. Like, in order to have insight, you have to be self-reflective, you have to be somewhat humble, and you have to also be willing to be self-deprecating. These are traits which I've noticed, and I'm not trying to make any generalizations, are lacking from the progressive left. They take themselves very seriously, they're unable to make fun of themselves, and they think they're entitled to make decisions for the rest of people. But people who don't understand that say, well, that's what you get from a tyrant. Oh, well, all that kissing up to RT, all that kissing up to Russia, what good did it do to you? And they don't understand that France also made a similar request of Rumble to take down RT. And so they sit there on the one hand, sucking and blowing, calling Russia a dictatorship, an authoritarian regime, Putin a dictator for ordering censorship, and then giving it a pass when France does it, giving it a pass when Brazil does it, and then giving it a pass basically when the government of Canada seems hell-bent on doing it. Criminalize, and I heard Ezra, that criminalizing hate. Call me old school. I want to know who hates me, and I want to hear them say it, so I want to know who they are. And I want to know what they look like. I'll cross the street. And but you don't have to cross the street in a free society. I'll cross the street or I won't. But I want to know who hates me. I want to know why they hate me. And there might be good reasons why they have grievances with me. And the discussion that ensues from the hate, and I'll put it in quotes, might actually be productive. But hate is like Ezra says, a human nature. And although you shouldn't be proud of it, it's something that's innate to all of us. And there's a difference between expressing hate for whatever the hell that means and acting on it. And the idea that you think you're going to diminish acting on hate as if laws don't already exist by criminalizing the human feeling of hate. I mean, why not legislate love while we're at the idiocy? Make love required and see how well that goes. So, but what it is, it's a not so thinly veiled attempt to control thought, control politics, and control power. And it's what we're witnessing right now. Where does it go, however? So I'm glad I'm reminding myself, it's always for our own protection. That's the most amazing part about it, is that, I'm going to go on a rant. How much time? I have 16 minutes left. I can do this. These governments, which have lied to us not just for years, but for centuries, in fact, lied to us since their inceptions. I don't care what anybody thinks, they build roads, good for them. They are an evil that needs to be kept to the most minimal evil, period. They are evil, they have always been evil. And at the risk of being accused of throwing meat to a crowd, because anybody who thinks government is not evil, I'm going to say it is an idiot, because it's an inconsistent way to think of government. Because they haven't stopped to think, why is government good and private corporation bad? Well, private corporations seeking profit. They have very selfish interests. Oh, I'm sorry, you don't think government has equally selfish, corrupt interests? I mean, if you don't trust humans in private enterprise, why the hell would you trust those same humans in government enterprise? Period. But bottom line, we need roads, we need hospitals, we need things that typically government has been able to provide with minimal corruption, although ask Quebec about the Olympic Stadium, and I think they'll tell you a different story. For those of you who don't know, what was it? It's sort of like the ArriveCan app scandal. It was supposed to cost $80,000, ended up costing $60 million. What did the Olympic Stadium? It was supposed to cost it cost tenfold what it was supposed to cost. I think we finally paid it off in the late '80s or early '90s. Fact check me on that. But bottom line, it was a corrupt scandal that cost exponentially more than it was budgeted to. Why? Because government is just as corrupt as people. People think you go into law and you're going to see dignified people, because after all, law is a dignified profession. Law is run by humans, and humans are both good and bad. And some humans are bad, and some humans who are bad are attracted to positions of power for bad reasons. Now, I was talking about how bad the government is. So the idea that that the government is some sort of benevolent good, and that it should be as big as possible. We've seen how it works to absolutely coerce submission from a population. The more the people are dependent on the government, either for your $2,000 a month because they shut your business down, or because you're employed by the government and you can't bite the hand that feeds you, the more government control, the more control of a society, the more they can make Hitler's willing executioners, because nobody can say no because it means their family and not someone else's family. But the idea that the government always comes out and, like the true narcissist abusers that they are, because is it going to be hate speech? Where's the camera? Trump is a narcissistic, psychotic abuser, period. He is what he accuses everyone else of being, and that's what narcissists do. They are the evil, they are the racist, misogynist bigots who then accuse other people of being the bigots. You imagine, I'm going to get enraged. There's doctors in here in case I have a heart attack. The man invites a Nazi into the White House and then makes it our learning moment. It's embarrassing for Canadians. No, you are embarrassing for Canadians. And then, no, but like his act of absolute historical illiteracy, overt intolerance and hatred becomes my learning lesson, go to hell, Trudeau. Now, does that become hate speech? Like, it's the man, and I've got the litany of all of them. This man, you all know this, 2 times ethics breaching, 3 times accused, apologized for groping a reporter back in the day, had so many pictures of blackface that the media that he was subsidizing, never released, although they had access to this years before it finally broke. He's going to accuse me of misogyny, racism, anti-Semitism, extremism. Go to hell, trust. There's no other. I'm not going to swear here because there's no children in the crowd. GFSY, Trudeau. But the idea that they come in and they say, we're doing it for your own good, we're doing it for your own protection. You can't trust yourself with guns. And meanwhile, you get the police chief of York saying, they're coming. They're robbing you. Put your keys at the front door. They've got guns. They're loaded. They're not toy guns, but you don't get them. So they enact these laws for your own protection because we can't be trusted. They have to take care of us. It's the Kamala Harris and the Daddy Joe Biden phenomenon. And they pitch these things as for the greater good. And when they say for the greater good, they really mean for their greater good. Bottom line. Who would have thunk? Back in the day, I'm not old enough to remember, but I'm old enough to remember remembering. They called Reagan an extremist. They attacked his mental acuity. They called him too dumb for the office. Now, I won't get into whether or not Reaganomics and he was the best president ever. He certainly wasn't Joe Biden. And I don't mean that in a good way. But, for all of his stupidities, as they accuse him of, he said some damn good things. I don't know if this one is only to him. It might have been Mark Twain, that freedom is never one generation away from extinction. I've lived it now. I was born, I think I was free. I might not have been, it might have just been an illusion of freedom. I was born in an era where, I could run through people's backyards and not worry about getting arrested. We could make prank calls and not worry about getting canceled. Although, if anybody heard the prank calls we made, I might get retroactively canceled 30 years later. But, I think I was born free. And I know what my kids were born into, or raised in because they were born pre-COVID, but it's not freedom. It's the exact opposite. It's not a world that a kid should have to grow up in or think is normal. But now I lost my train of thought. It was the born free. And we're living right now through basically total control in all aspects. And this law is going to get passed. If it gets passed, you cannot understand the ramifications of what will happen. It's not an if, it's a when, and it's a how bad. And we're seeing it in the States. We're seeing the weaponization of opaque laws. Not to make it about Trump, but we're seeing what happens when you have government who have control the levers of everything. Media, to some extent, at least working in collusion, because they are. And this is what happens in the States, this is what happens in Canada. They control prosecution, the justice system. It was Yuri Bezmenov. Everybody's heard that speech. It's how it happens, and we're at the stages now where I can actually look back and say, I think I was born free, and I know that I'm not as free now as I was when I was born. And is that progress? It's not progress. It's actually regression. And so you have they're coming. It's for our own goods. It's the punchline. I'm going to give you the punchline is this. I told you it wasn't going to be a black pill. There's going to be a white pill. It happens slowly, then all at once is not only true of the bad, it's true of the good. And we're seeing it now. And now, that was my deep thought of the night last night. It might just be something as trivial as the pendulum swings back eventually. But the bottom line, the slow seeds eventually sprout into something. People have the misconception that bamboo grows overnight, and it doesn't. It takes months or years for the root system to be in place so that it could support what people perceive to be the overnight growth. And so it happens slowly, then all at once, both for good and for bad. And I think we're seeing the for good now as well. I think now, living in retrospect, it goes back to 2016 when they said, can you believe they actually said Donald Trump, by the way, someone's going to screen grab that, Viva extremist. The ADL made the OK gesture as a symbol of hate. Just another example of idiocy trying to define hatred. But bottom line, you remember back in 2016, they said Trump got elected because we didn't suppress politicized speech on Facebook. I'm paraphrasing the headlines, but I had to go back and refresh my memory. This blew open in 2015, 2016. Not in 2020, but this is when people had their big awakening. That's sort of when I started having mine, but I didn't really say anything about it for another couple of years. They said Trump got elected because Facebook didn't do a good enough job suppressing politicized speech. It allowed for radicalization of people. What they effectively said is free speech got Trump elected. Exchange of ideas got the populist president elected. And what are they doing now? Across the world, not just in Canada. They described it in the Time magazine article from 2020. A secret cabal controlling laws, changing regulations, controlling the flow of information, controlling perceptions. But they weren't rigging the election, they were fortifying it. I mean, back when Noam Chomsky was sane, this would have been called manufacturing consent. What they are doing right now is this on steroids, because it's been my pitch and my bone to pick for a long time. The internet is the last bastion of freedom of speech in the current iteration of technology that we have right now. Back in the day, the printing press threatened the powers that be. Control the printing press. And then you get the internet, and then lo and behold, what happens when you have the free flow of ideas on the internet? The propagandists, they don't just die due to lack of demand. They get exposed. And it's been exposed. The corruption, the insidious, incestuous relationship between media and government, financial and political, has been exposed. And it's been exposed because of the free platform of the internet, the modern day printing press. What do they have to do? Everything they can to suppress that right now. Online Streaming Act is a disguised internet censorship bill. Not so disguised, but the intent is disguised. The link tax is a not so disguised internet censorship bill. Not the sole purpose, but the main purpose, in my view, is to continue to prop up the legacy media and to continue to finance them in ways that they can no longer do it. The Online Harms Act, which is what we're here for, I mean, I feel bad in a way. I said I ran for office in Canada, for the People's Party of Canada. Maxime Bernier is the... When people ask me if I trust politicians, I don't trust any politician except Maxime Bernier. And I say this... And now, I know some Trump fans, I like Trump, and I have my gripes with some policies of Trump, and it's not a lack of trust. It's that when I look at Maxime Bernier, and I knew what the media told me of him before I knew what I actually learned of him. He's a man who takes politically unpopular positions despite their political unpopularity, which I think is, the telltale sign of an honest politician, which might be why he's had, I won't say it's not success in politics, but politics is not a place for honest people any more than the practice of law is a place for honest lawyers. So, they're doing it right now, and they're not just doing it in Canada, they're doing it in the States. They're trying to import the ideas of banning hate speech. Why? Because, Quebec, I don't know if it passed yet, but they're putting forward a bill that would make it illegal to harass politicians. First of all, I thought there were already criminal harassment laws in place, and politicians are not more special than John Smith from down the street. What they want to do, and they're doing it everywhere, is criminalize political discourse and then transform random gestures into perceived political hate so they can demonize people, write them off, suppress them, and control thought and politics. They're doing it in Canada. They're doing it in the States. They've done it in China for a long time. They're doing it in Russia. They're doing it in France, Brazil. What we're witnessing... You all remember that GIF, and it's the guy, he puts a little domino and it pushes a bigger domino, and it's called Momentum. If you haven't seen it, it's cool. It's a GIF on the internet. It's a video also. And it ends up, from a little domino, ends up pushing down a massive marble slate. When Trump started getting these indictments, when one judge acted batshit crazy and did something totally judicially corrupt, it didn't serve as a deterrence to others, it served as a motivation. And what we're witnessing right now is a similar form of political, legislative corruption from all of these so-called free and democratic Western societies, where instead of lashing out and pushing back against the corruption, the Vladimir Putin level authoritarian corruption, they're leaning into it. And they're saying, well, France did it, Brazil did it, Canada's doing it, so hey, let's all do it. And you know what you have then? You don't have a government for the people and by the people. You have a government that is governing the people and ruling over them like the peasants that they think they are. And so the pushback starts somewhere. And it's got to start, look, never in a million years, would I think that Canada would have pushed me out, pushed me to Florida, made me look the way I looked when I was a rebellious 20-year-old, and never in a million, I would be sitting on a stage I don't know if this is fighting or just talking about free speech or just making people understand it doesn't end here and it doesn't end well. But they made me do this. They pushed me into this corner, extremist corner. There's that other meme. It's like, who radicalized you? And it's the guy whispering back, you did. Like, first of all, I'm not radical. And if thinking this is radical, then I want to be radical. But the bottom line is, we are seeing this momentum across the world. And it's not free, it's not democratic, it's not traditional Western values. It's actually the exact opposite. And people need to stop and call out that groping, blackface, racist, anti-Semitic POS in Parliament and say, it's not Canadian, and we're not going to put up with it. We're mad as hell, and we're not going to take it anymore. And the only way to do it, so nobody takes this out of context, the only way to do it is nonviolent, political, waking people up, and I adopted the strategy of public humiliation. They're not, look, I appreciate, I have kids and they shouldn't swear, but they're not beyond go fuck yourself. And when they do things that warrant that, Robert Barnes, my partner-in-law at Viva Barnes Law, he says, I think he's quoting a guy named Roy Barnes, but I don't know who he's quoting. Sometimes you need to cuss the people that need cussing. And I'm a polite person. And I still think sometimes it is still polite to cuss the people that need cussing because they need to be shaken by the shoulders and woken up. So I know I have to stop at 2 minutes. Bottom line, it happens slowly then all at once. Right now we're planting the seeds, the root of that bamboo tree that when it grows and people say enough is enough, courage is contagious as much as corruption is contagious. So, and you know what else is contagious? Abandonment. What's the word I'm looking for? Despair is contagious. So don't despair. Do not resort to violence. And if they say speech is violence, or, well, they say silence is violence, so you're really stuck in a corner there, let them know and wake people up, because it's not for your own good. It's for their good. And it's not for your protection, it's for their protection. And in as much as I don't trust the Conservative Party to take down this law if it ever gets passed, that's because it's nice to fight for freedom of speech when you're in the position of weakness and you're in the minority. And then when you're in the position of power, you're like, what's this? They're using their freedom of speech to attack me. I don't like this anymore. Maybe I won't repeal the Online Harms Act. So I don't trust them to do the right thing after the wrong thing has been done. So the time is now to take a stand and make people understand. Thank you. I'm coming. Okay. See you later, people.